The most dangerous mistake you can make with a toxic person is believing you must defeat them. You don't. The moment you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop seeking their approval, you take your power back. And in this speech, I will show you the smartest way to deal with toxic people without becoming toxic yourself. Before we continue, answer this honestly. What is more powerful, proving a toxic person wrong or becoming completely unaffected by them? Comment peace if you've reached a point where protecting your peace matters more than winning an argument. And remember this, sometimes the strongest response you can give a toxic person is not a better argument. It is a better version of yourself. Let's get started. Number 1, stop reacting. Your emotional control is your power. There is a moment in every difficult relationship when you realize something very uncomfortable. The other person may not be controlling you because they are stronger than you. They may be controlling you because they have learned exactly how to make you react. They know what to say. They know which subject will anger you. They know which weakness to touch. They know how to accuse you, provoke you, criticize you, ignore you, or suddenly become kind again. And if every time they push a button, you react exactly as they expect, then the button is not really in their hand, it is in yours. This is where many people misunderstand strength. They believe strength means having the perfect answer. They believe strength means winning the argument. They believe strength means making the other person feel what they made you feel. But real strength begins somewhere much quieter. Real strength begins when you can feel anger without becoming anger. You can feel hurt without allowing hurt to decide your next action. You can hear an insult without immediately needing to return one. You can be misunderstood without desperately trying to prove your worth. That is emotional control. And emotional control does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean pretending you do not care. It means you care, but you remain the person who chooses what happens next. Think about what happens when someone says something cruel to you. The words enter your mind. Immediately, your body changes, your heart becomes faster, your breathing becomes shorter. Your mind begins producing answers. I should have said this. How dare they? They always do this. Next time, I will destroy their argument. And suddenly, the conversation is no longer happening in front of you. It is happening inside you. The other person may have walked away 5 minutes ago, but you are still arguing with them for the next 5 hours. This is one of the hidden costs of toxic people. They can occupy your mind without even being present. And if you allow that to happen repeatedly, you begin giving them something much more valuable than your time. You give them your inner peace. So the first discipline is simple. Pause before you answer. Pause. Before you defend yourself. Pause. Before you sense the message. Pause. Before you make the decision that you will regret tomorrow. Pause. That small space between what happens and what you do next is where your freedom lives. A toxic person may control what they say. They may control their behavior. They may try to control your emotions. But they do not have to control your response. You can choose. That choice may look small from the outside, but inside it is enormous. Because when you stop reacting automatically, you begin observing. And when you observe, you begin understanding. You start noticing patterns. You notice that the same person always creates conflict when attention moves away from them. You notice that they become kind when they want something. You notice that they turn every boundary into an accusation. You notice that whenever you try to discuss their behavior, somehow you end up apologizing for yours. And this is where your next level of wisdom begins, because a toxic pattern cannot be changed if you cannot first recognize it. But recognition requires something most people avoid. It requires you to stop looking only at the latest incident and start looking at the pattern. And that brings us to something even deeper. Number 2, recognize toxic patterns without becoming obsessed with them. One bad moment does not automatically make someone toxic. Everyone has difficult days. Everyone becomes defensive sometimes. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone can say something they regret. Wisdom is not labeling every difficult person as toxic. Wisdom is learning to recognize repeated patterns. Look at behavior over time. Does this person regularly disrespect your boundaries? Do they constantly blame everyone else? Do they refuse responsibility? Do they manipulate your emotions to get what they want? Do they repeatedly make you feel guilty for having reasonable needs? Do they create confusion and then blame you for being confused? Do they apologize only when they fear losing access to you and then repeat the same behavior? Patterns tell you more than promises anyone can say, "I'm sorry." The deeper question is, what happens after the apology? Because words can create hope, portals reveal reality. This is why you should not become hypnotized by explanations. A person can give you 1,000 reasons for their behavior. Maybe they had a difficult childhood. Maybe they are insecure. Maybe they are afraid. Maybe someone hurt them in the past. And perhaps all of those things are true. But understanding why someone behaves badly does not require you to keep accepting the behavior. Compassion does not mean unlimited access. Understanding does not mean surrendering your boundaries. You can understand someone's pain and still protect yourself from the way they express that pain. This distinction is extremely important, because many good-hearted people stay too long in unhealthy situations because they think leaving means they are not compassionate. They say, "But I understand why they act this way." Yes, but understanding is not the same as accepting. You can understand the fire and still choose not to put your hand into it. You can understand why someone is angry and still refuse to become their target. You can understand their wounds without allowing those wounds to become your wounds. This is where many people lose themselves. They become so focused on analyzing the toxic person that they forget to observe themselves. They ask, "Why does he do this? Why does she say that? What does this behavior mean? What happened to them?" But there is another question that may be far more useful. What is happening to me when I stay around this? Are you becoming anxious? Are you constantly checking your phone? Are you rehearsing conversations in your head? Are you afraid to speak honestly? Are you beginning to doubt your own memory? Are you changing your personality simply to prevent conflict? Are you becoming someone you do not recognize? Pay attention, because sometimes the clearest evidence is not what the toxic person says. It is who you become around them. A healthy relationship does not require you to permanently abandon yourself in order to maintain peace. And this does not mean every uncomfortable relationship must immediately end. Sometimes the answer is communication. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is acceptance that you cannot change the other person. And sometimes, yes, it is leaving. But you cannot make a wise decision while your mind is constantly spinning. This is why observation must come before action. Do not obsess. Observe, there is a difference. Obsession asks, "Why are they doing this to me?" Observation asks, "What pattern am I seeing?" Obsession keeps checking the wound. Observation studies the lesson. Obsession keeps trying to decode the other person. Wisdom asks what you need to do next. And once you recognize the pattern, something interesting happens. You no longer need to respond to every single event. You begin seeing the structure underneath it. You realize that the argument about the dishes was never really about the dishes. The criticism about your decision was never really about the decision. The sudden anger was not necessarily caused by your last sentence. You begin recognizing the cycle: trigger, reaction, blame, confusion, apology, temporary peace, then repetition. Once you see the cycle, you can stop entering it. That is powerful. Because the smartest person in a toxic interaction is not always the person with the best argument. It is often the person who recognizes the pattern early enough to stop participating in it. And once you stop reacting and start recognizing, you arrive at the most practical question of all. What do you do when the pattern continues? You create a boundary, and this is where many people become afraid. Because they confuse boundaries with rejection. They think saying no means being cruel. They think asking for respect means being aggressive. They think protecting their time means being selfish. But a boundary is not an attack. A boundary is information. It tells another person, this is what I accept, this is what I do not accept, and this is what I will do if the line is crossed. That is very different from trying to control someone. You cannot control another person, but you can decide what you will participate in. And that brings us to the next discipline. Number 3, set boundaries without anger, guilt, or explanation. A boundary becomes powerful when you stop using it as a weapon and start using it as a form of self-respect. You do not need to scream. You do not need to threaten. You do not need to explain your entire childhood. You do not need to provide a 20-minute presentation defending why you deserve basic respect. Sometimes a boundary can be one sentence. I'm not continuing this conversation while we are insulting each other. I'm not available for this. I understand that you disagree, but my decision remains the same. If you speak to me that way, I will end the conversation. Simple, clear, calm. The difficulty is not always knowing what to say. The difficulty is tolerating the reaction that may come afterward. Because when you establish a boundary with someone who benefited from you having none, they may not celebrate your growth. They may become angry. They may accuse you of changing. They may say you are selfish. They may tell you that you are the problem. They may suddenly become emotional. They may remind you of everything they have ever done for you. And this is where guilt becomes dangerous. Because guilt can make you confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. You can feel guilty and still be doing the right thing. Write that again in your mind. Feeling guilty does not automatically mean you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply the emotional resistance that appears when you stop behaving in the old way. If you spent years saying yes, your first no may feel cruel. If you spent years explaining yourself, your silence may feel wrong. If you spent years absorbing insults, walking away may feel selfish. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. A boundary may feel uncomfortable precisely because you have never practiced it. Think of someone who has never exercised. The first training session feels difficult. That discomfort does not mean the exercise is harmful. It means the body is encountering something new. Boundaries can be like that. Your mind has to learn. I can disappoint someone and still respect myself. I can say no without hating the person. I can leave an argument without losing. I can protect my peace without proving that the other person is bad. This is maturity, and there is another important principle. Do not explain a boundary endlessly to someone committed to crossing it. Explanation has value when the other person is trying to understand. But if someone repeatedly demands explanations only to find another reason to argue, then your explanation becomes another door into the conflict. You say, I cannot do that. They ask why. You explain, they challenge your reason. You defend the reason. They attack the defense. You explain again. And suddenly, your simple boundary has become a courtroom. You are the defendant. They are the prosecutor, and you are desperately trying to prove that you have permission to make your own decision. You do not need permission to have a boundary. This does not mean becoming unreasonable. It means becoming clear. There is great power in a calm sentence repeated without emotional escalation. I understand you disagree. My answer is still no. I hear what you are saying. I am not changing my decision. We can speak when we are both calm. That is enough. You do not have to win, you have to remain grounded. And remember, a boundary without action is often only a request. If you say, if you insult me, I will end the conversation. Then you must be willing to end the conversation. Otherwise, the other person learns that your boundary is negotiable. This is why boundaries require courage. You are not simply telling someone what they cannot do. You are accepting responsibility for what you will do. That is the difference between control and self-control. Control says, you must change. Self-control says, if this continues, I will choose my response. Control depends on another person's obedience. Self-control depends on your own discipline. And that is why self-control is strong. You may not be able to make a toxic person become respectful. You may not be able to make them understand you. You may not be able to make them apologize. You may not even be able to make them admit what they did. but you can decide how much access their behavior has to your mind, your time, your attention, and your life. That is where your power returns, and there is something else you must understand. A boundary is not always physical distance. Sometimes the person is your coworker, sometimes they are part of your family, sometimes you cannot simply disappear. In these situations, the boundary may be emotional rather than physical. You can communicate only about necessary matters. You can refuse to discuss private information. You can stop defending every personal decision. You can limit the amount of time you spend in conflict. You can stop looking for approval. You can stop expecting a person to become someone they have repeatedly shown you they are not. That last one can be painful, but it can also be liberating. Because sometimes your suffering comes not only from someone's behavior, it comes from your expectation that one day they will finally become different. You keep waiting, you keep explaining, you keep giving another chance. You keep thinking, maybe if I say it differently, maybe if they understand my feelings, maybe next time. But wisdom asks a harder question. What if I stop waiting for their transformation and start transforming my response? That is where freedom begins, because your peace cannot depend on someone else's personality. If your peace requires another person to behave perfectly, then your peace is not yet in your hands. But when you learn to regulate yourself, recognize patterns, and establish boundaries, something changes. You become harder to manipulate. Not because you become harder-hearted, because you become clearer. You stop confusing kindness with surrender. You stop confusing forgiveness with access. You stop confusing silence with weakness, and you stop confusing someone else's anger with your responsibility. This is the deeper lesson. The goal is not to become better at fighting toxic people. The goal is to become so internally stable that you no longer need to fight every battle they offer you. Some battles deserve your voice, some deserve your boundary, some deserve your distance, and some deserve nothing at all. The wisdom is knowing the difference, because once you master your reaction, recognize the pattern, and protect yourself with a clear boundary, you discover something most people learn too late. You do not need to change the toxic person to change the relationship. Sometimes changing your response changes the entire dynamic. Sometimes the other person adjusts. Sometimes they leave. Sometimes the relationship becomes healthier. And sometimes the boundary reveals a truth you did not want to see. That can hurt. But truth that hurts you for a moment is often kinder than a lie that controls you for years. So do not make your mission to defeat toxic people. Make your mission to become difficult to disturb, not emotionless, not arrogant, not cold, simply grounded. Let people misunderstand you without chasing them. Let people disagree with you without immediately defending yourself. Let people be angry without becoming angry for them. Let people reveal themselves without trying to rewrite what you see. And when you can do that, you are no longer living from reaction. You are living from choice. But there is one final danger, because even after you learn to control your reactions, recognize patterns, and set boundaries, you can still lose your peace in another way. You can spend so much energy protecting yourself from toxic people that they continue to occupy your life. And the next level of wisdom is learning when protection means more than resistance. Sometimes protection means knowing exactly when to step back. Sometimes strength is not standing your ground. Sometimes strength is knowing when to walk away. Number 4. Never fight for understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding you. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from physical work. It comes from constantly trying to prove who you are to someone who has already decided who you are. You explain, they misunderstand. You explain again, they find another accusation. You clarify your intention. They question your intention. You show them what actually happened. They change the subject, and after hours of talking, you are left wondering, how can someone still not understand me? This is one of the most painful experiences in human relationships, because when we are misunderstood, our natural instinct is to explain ourselves. We think, if I can just find the right words, they will understand. If I can explain what I really meant, everything will become clear. If they knew what I was feeling, they would treat me differently. Sometimes that is true. Healthy people can misunderstand you and still be willing to listen. They may say, "I did not see it that way. Tell me what you meant." That is a conversation. But there is another situation that requires a different kind of wisdom. What happens when someone does not want to understand? What happens when misunderstanding benefits them? What happens when they are not searching for truth, but searching for a reason to blame you? Then more explanation does not create clarity. It creates another battlefield. And this is something many intelligent, kind people struggle to accept. You cannot reason someone out of a position they are emotionally committed to keeping. You may bring facts. They bring accusations. You bring calmness. They bring another conflict. You bring evidence. They bring another interpretation. And because you still believe that understanding will solve the problem, you keep going. You keep explaining. But there comes a moment when wisdom asks you to stop. Not because you have nothing to say, because you have already said enough. There is a difference between being misunderstood and being deliberately misrepresented. The first can often be healed through communication. The second cannot always be healed through more communication. Think about how much energy people waste trying to convince others that they are good. They say, "I am not selfish. I did not mean that. I have always been there for you. I would never do that. I was only trying to help." And perhaps every word is true, but if someone has already decided to interpret everything you do through suspicion, then your defense becomes endless. You spend your life standing in front of an imaginary court, trying to prove your innocence. But ask yourself something. Who appointed them as the judge of your character? You know your intentions, you know your effort, you know what you did and did not do. That does not mean you should become blind to your mistakes. Quite the opposite. A wise person is willing to examine themselves. If someone gives you criticism, listen. If there is truth in it, learn. If you made a mistake, admit it. Apologize when necessary. Challenge when necessary. But after you have honestly examined yourself, you do not need to keep putting yourself on trial because someone refuses to accept your answer. There is a point where self-reflection becomes self-doubt. And there is a point where humility becomes self-abandonment. You must know the difference. If you make a mistake, own it. If you are wrong, correct it. But if you have done your part and someone still insists on creating a version of you that does not exist, you do not have to spend your life correcting their imagination. This is especially important with toxic people, because some of them understand that your need to be understood can be used against you. They know you care about being fair. They know you hate conflict. They know you want people to see your good intentions. So they create situations where you feel forced to defend yourself. And while you are busy explaining yourself, the original issue disappears. Suddenly, you are discussing your tone, then your attitude, then something you did 6 months ago, then something someone told them, then something they think you might do in the future. The conversation expands until you no longer remember how it began. This is not resolution, this is emotional fog. And the way out of fog is not always more movement. Sometimes you must become still. You can say, "I have explained my position. I understand that you see it differently. I am not going to keep arguing about this." That sentence may feel strange at first, because your mind will tell you, "But what if they still think I am wrong?" Let them. That is the price of freedom. You cannot control every opinion about you. You cannot correct every rumor. You cannot answer every accusation. You cannot force every person to see your heart. And if you try, you will spend your life chasing people who are committed to misunderstanding you. There is another reason this matters. The more desperately you try to be understood, the more power you give the other person over your emotional state. If they understand you, you feel peaceful. If they misunderstand you, you feel anxious. If they approve of you, you feel valuable. If they criticize you, you feel worthless. Now your emotional stability depends on someone else's perception. That is not freedom. Real freedom begins when you can say, I know who I am, even if you do not. Not with arrogance, with inner clarity. You do not need everyone to like you. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not even need everyone to agree with you. You need to remain honest with yourself. And sometimes the strongest response to a false accusation is not a stronger defense. It is consistency. Let your actions speak over time. Let your character become visible through repetition. Let people who are willing to understand, and let those who refuse to understand carry their interpretation. This does not mean becoming passive. There are situations where you should speak clearly. There are situations where injustice must be addressed. There are situations where silence would allow harm to continue. Wisdom is not silence in every situation. Wisdom is knowing when speaking creates understanding and when speaking only feeds the conflict. That distinction takes practice. Ask yourself before responding. Am I speaking because this needs to be resolved? Or am I speaking because I cannot tolerate being misunderstood? Those two motivations may sound similar, but they lead to completely different outcomes. The first seeks resolution, the second seeks emotional relief. And emotional relief often makes us say more than necessary. This is why silence can sometimes be stronger than explanation. Not because silence proves you are right. Because silence prevents you from becoming trapped in a conversation that has no destination. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. You do not have to answer every accusation. You do not have to defend every part of yourself. Some people will only understand your boundary after they lose access to you. And sometimes that is not your failure, it is their choice. But once you stop fighting to be understood, another challenge appears. Because you may discover that what you actually need is not better communication. You need better protection. And that is where the next lesson begins. Number 5, protect your peace without losing your compassion. There is a beautiful quality in compassionate people. They can see the pain behind someone's behavior. They can forgive. They can give second chances. They can remain patient when others are difficult. But compassion without boundaries can become self-destruction. This is something many good people learn too late. They think, if I understand them, I should tolerate them. If I forgive them, I should keep them close. If they are hurting, I should stay. If they need me, I cannot leave. But compassion does not require self-sacrifice without limits. You can care about someone and still create distance. You can forgive someone and still stop trusting them. You can wish someone well and still refuse to let them into your life. You can understand their wounds and still protect your own. This is not cruelty, it is balance. Imagine holding a burning piece of wood because you feel sorry for the fire. You may understand why it burns. You may respect its nature. You may even feel compassion for what caused it. But you still have to put it down, otherwise, your hand becomes the next thing that burns. People sometimes believe that being a good person means remaining available to everyone. It does not. Your time is limited. Your attention is limited. Your energy is limited. Your emotional capacity is limited. If you give everything to people who continually drain you, eventually you will have nothing left for the people and purposes that truly matter. Peace is not something you find only after every problem disappears. Peace is something you learn to protect while problems still exist. This means becoming selective. Not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. Think about your life as a house. You can be kind to everyone who passes by, but kindness does not mean giving everyone the keys. Some people may be welcome at the door. Some may be invited inside. Some may be trusted with a room. Very few should have access to the entire house. Your inner world deserves the same wisdom. You can respect someone without trusting them. You can communicate with someone without revealing everything about yourself. You can work with someone without becoming emotionally entangled with them. You can love someone without allowing them to decide your emotional state. This is maturity. And one of the most important parts of maturity is learning not to confuse access with love. Sometimes we think, if I really love this person, I should always be available. No, sometimes love means giving space. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes love means refusing to participate in destructive behavior. Sometimes love means allowing another person to experience the consequences of their choices. You are not responsible for rescuing everyone from every consequence. If you constantly protect someone from the results of their behavior, you may accidentally prevent them from learning. There is a difference between helping someone and carrying them. Helping says, "I will support you while you walk." Carrying says, "I will live your life for you." And carrying another adult forever is not compassion. It is often exhaustion disguised as love. You must also learn to recognize emotional debt. Some toxic relationships survive because one person keeps reminding the other, "After everything I have done for you." This creates a hidden contract. The person gives something, then later uses it to demand obedience. But genuine kindness does not come with a permanent invoice. "If I help you only so I can control you later," that was not pure generosity. It was a transaction. And you do not need to spend your life repaying a debt that someone keeps increasing. Protecting your peace also means becoming comfortable with disappointing people. This is difficult, especially if you are someone who has spent years trying to keep everyone happy. You may feel responsible for other people's emotions. If they are upset, you think you must fix it. If they are angry, you think you must apologize. If they are disappointed, you think you have done something wrong. But another person's disappointment is not always evidence of your wrongdoing. Sometimes people are disappointed because they cannot get what they want from you anymore. That is different. When you change your behavior, people who benefited from your old behavior may resist. If you used to answer every call and suddenly stop answering at midnight, someone may say you have changed. You have. And that can be healthy. Growth often looks like change to people who preferred your old boundaries. You do not have to become cruel. You simply have to become clear. There is a quiet strength in saying, "I care about you, but I cannot do this. I understand your situation, but I cannot take responsibility for it. I wish you well, but I need distance. I forgive you, but trust needs to be rebuilt." These sentences contain compassion and strength at the same time. That is the balance. A soft heart does not require weak boundaries. A strong boundary does not require a hard heart. You can be both. And this is where forgiveness must be understood correctly. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as permission. It is not. Forgiveness can mean, "I release myself from carrying this anger." It does not necessarily mean, "I give you another opportunity to hurt me." You can forgive someone from a distance. You can stop hating them without inviting them back. You can release resentment without restoring trust. Trust is different. Trust is built through behavior. If someone repeatedly breaks your trust, you are not cruel for becoming careful. You are learning. And learning from pain is one of the highest forms of protection. Do not let a painful experience make you bitter. Let it make you wiser. Do not say, "I will never trust anyone again." Say, "I will trust more consciously." Do not say, "Everyone is selfish." Say, "I will pay more attention to patterns." Do not say, "I will never love again." Say, "I will love without abandoning myself." That is transformation. You do not have to become less loving because someone misused your love. You simply become more discerning about where you place it. And there is a deeper reason to protect your peace. Your inner state affects everything you touch. When your mind is constantly occupied by conflict, you cannot fully focus on your purpose. You cannot give your best attention to your work. You cannot enjoy simple moments. You cannot sleep peacefully. You begin carrying conversations into places where they do not belong. You are eating, but thinking about the argument. You are working, but thinking about what they said. You are with people who love you, but your mind is still somewhere else. That is why peace is not a luxury. It is a resource. Guard it. Not because you are afraid of people, because you value the life you are building. And eventually you may reach a point where you realize something surprising. The goal was never to create a life where nobody disturbs you. That is impossible. The goal is to become so grounded that disturbance does not control your direction. You cannot control the weather, but you can learn how to steer. You cannot control every person, but you can control who gets access to your inner world. You cannot prevent every toxic interaction, but you can decide how long you remain inside one. And once you understand this, you begin asking a deeper question. What if I have already learned enough from this relationship? That question can be frightening because sometimes the answer is distance. And knowing when to create that distance is the final discipline. Number 6, no. When silence is wisdom and distance is strength, there are moments in life when talking is the right answer. And there are moments when talking becomes another way of refusing to accept reality. You explain. You forgive, you communicate, you set boundaries, you give opportunities. But the same behavior continues. At some point, you must stop asking, how can I make this person change? And start asking, what does their repeated behavior tell me? This is not pessimism, it is observation. A single mistake tells you very little. A repeated pattern tells you much more. If someone crosses your boundary once and sincerely changes, there may be room for repair. If they cross it repeatedly, apologize repeatedly, promise repeatedly, and repeat the behavior again, then the apology has become part of the pattern. This is difficult to accept because human beings naturally focus on potential. We see who someone could become. We remember their good moments. We remember the beginning. We remember the promises. And sometimes we become more loyal to the memory of a person than to the person standing in front of us. You may say, but they were not always like this. Perhaps. But the question is not who they were. The question is who they consistently choose to be now. People can change, absolutely. But you should not build your life around potential change that has not happened. Watch behavior. Give time. Let consistency speak. And when someone repeatedly shows you that they do not respect your boundaries, distance may become the healthiest response. Distance does not always mean hatred. Sometimes distance is simply clarity. You can walk away without creating an enemy. You can leave without announcing it to everyone. You can stop participating in unnecessary conversations. You can reduce contact. You can become unavailable for drama. You can choose peace without making a speech about choosing peace. This is important because some people think leaving must be dramatic. They want a final conversation, a final explanation, a final message that contains every pain they have carried for years. Sometimes that is necessary, but often it is not. Sometimes closure does not come from making another person understand what they did. Sometimes closure comes from understanding what you will no longer accept. That is a very different kind of closure. You stop waiting for them to admit it. You stop waiting for the perfect apology. You stop waiting for them to finally say, "You were right," and you begin living. There is enormous freedom in no longer needing someone else to validate your experience. Silence can be powerful here. But silence should not be confused with suppression. You do not stay silent because you are afraid. You stay silent because you have decided that your words will not improve the situation. That is wisdom. Silence becomes weakness when you are using it to avoid something that must be addressed. Silence becomes strength when you have already understood what needs to be understood and refuse to feed unnecessary conflict. The same is true of distance. Distance is not running away from every uncomfortable situation. Sometimes discomfort is exactly where growth happens. You should not leave every relationship because someone disagrees with you. You should not call everyone toxic because they challenged you. You should not confuse conflict with abuse. Healthy relationships contain disagreement. They contain frustration. They contain mistakes. The difference is what happens afterward. Can both people listen? Can both people take responsibility? Can both people respect boundaries? Can both people repair what they damaged? Can both people grow? If yes, there is something worth protecting. But if one person repeatedly harms, denies, manipulates, and refuses responsibility, then staying may no longer be an act of love. It may be an act of fear, fear of being alone, fear of being judged, fear of starting again, fear of what people will say, fear that nobody else will love you. And toxic relationships often survive on fear long after love has stopped being enough. So ask yourself, If I were not afraid, what would I choose? Do not answer immediately. Sit with the question, because sometimes your body already knows what your mind is still negotiating. You feel relief when you imagine distance. You breathe more freely, your shoulders relax, your mind becomes quieter. That does not automatically mean you must leave, but it is information. Pay attention, your inner world speaks in subtle ways. And when you finally decide to create distance, do not turn your departure into revenge. This is where many people make another mistake. They leave a toxic relationship and then spend the next 3 years trying to prove to everyone that the other person was toxic. They tell every story, they collect evidence, they check social media. They monitor what the person is doing. They wait for their downfall. They want justice. But ask yourself, if you are still watching them every day, have you really left? Physical distance is only the beginning. True distance happens when the person no longer occupies your attention. You stop checking, you stop explaining, you stop comparing, you stop hoping they will fail, you stop hoping they will finally regret losing you. You simply continue your life. That is freedom. And perhaps the most powerful thing you can do after leaving a toxic situation is not to become successful just to make someone regret losing you. Do not build your life as a message to someone else. Build it because it is your life. Your healing should not be a performance. Your peace should not be revenge. Your growth should not be punishment. Become better because you respect yourself. Become calmer because you value your mind. Become stronger because life requires strength. Become wiser because you do not want to repeat the same lesson. There will be people who misunderstand your distance. Let them. There will be people who call you cold. Let them. There will be people who say you have changed. Maybe you have. And perhaps that is the point. You are allowed to become someone who no longer participates in what once destroyed your peace. You are allowed to outgrow old patterns. You are allowed to stop returning to places where you had to betray yourself to belong. And you are allowed to walk away quietly. No hatred, no revenge, no dramatic announcement. Just clarity. Because the strongest person is not the person who can destroy their enemy. The strongest person is the person who can walk away without becoming their enemy. That is the real test. Can you protect yourself without becoming cruel? Can you set boundaries without becoming arrogant? Can you forgive without becoming available for repeated harm? Can you leave without carrying hatred with you? Can you choose peace without needing everyone to understand why? If you can, then something inside you has changed. You are no longer allowing another person's behavior to determine the quality of your character. They may be angry. You remain calm. They may manipulate. You remain clear. They may misunderstand. You remain grounded. They may leave. You remain whole. This is not weakness. This is mastery. Because the ultimate victory over a toxic person is not making them suffer. It is refusing to let their behavior transform you into someone you do not want to become. You do not have to become cruel because someone was cruel to you. You do not have to become suspicious because someone betrayed you. You do not have to close your heart because someone misused it. You can become wiser without becoming harder. You can become stronger without becoming colder. You can become more careful without becoming fearful. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson of all. Protect your peace, but do not lose your humanity while doing it. There will always be difficult people. There will always be manipulation. There will always be criticism. There will always be people who try to pull you into arguments that do not deserve your energy. You cannot remove all of them from the world. But you can decide how much of your world they are allowed to occupy. You can choose your reaction. You can recognize the pattern. You can establish the boundary. You can stop fighting for understanding where there is no willingness to understand. You can remain compassionate without surrendering yourself. And you can walk away when staying requires you to become smaller than who you truly are. The goal is not to live a life without difficult people. The goal is to live a life where difficult people no longer decide who you become. That is where your freedom begins. Not when everyone around you becomes peaceful. but when peace becomes something you carry within yourself.